Joining me now is Douglas Murray, Associate Editor of The Spectator and the best-selling author of The War on the West. Douglas, it's going to be a long, dark and cold winter for Europe. There is an energy crisis that is almost all self-inflicted, and as you've noted, there's a reality check underway for all the democracies that have embraced green policies, none more so than Germany.
That's right. Just think back over recent years in the West. Who has been perhaps one of the most important voices pushing us all to go straight onto green energy? But of course, a Swedish schoolgirl who decided to play truant. And we can tell in the fact that we actually had almost every major politician in the West actually listen to her. We can see a problem, the paucity of the debate in our societies, the lack of seriousness about issues that should be really serious. You know, 4 years ago at the UN, Donald Trump said that Germany was too reliant on Russian gas and that it would be paying a price for this. And the German diplomats, including the German ambassador to the United Nations, all laughed away and giggled away at Donald Trump. Now, you may not think that Donald Trump is the world's finest purveyor of truth, but he was telling the truth on this occasion. He was saying something that was absolutely true and giving the Europeans a reality check that was long overdue. The fact is that in European nation after European nation and in so many other countries in the West, everybody tried to get off fossil fuels too fast. They closed down their nuclear reactors. They didn't want to build any new ones. And you know, guess what? It turns out that Vladimir Putin has Europe's winter in his hands. And this was totally foreseeable. And the fact that we listened, as I say, to people we should never have listened to is something that we will, I'm sure, be reflecting on. And Germans and others will be reflecting on as the lights go out this winter.
And if you want to see insanity, Douglas, we are looking at what's happening in Europe and Germany, the UK, across the continent, and we're following those policies here in Australia.
Yes.
So we've seen them
That's
in action. We are seeing the suffering, the prices soaring. I think energy prices in the UK have jumped 80% in 12 months. Businesses are closing, people can't afford their bills, and Australia's going, oh, we'll have some of that.
Exactly. I mean, imagine that you run a pub or something, and you've seen your bills go up this much. How long can you keep going for? You know, you're a small business, you've seen your bills go up this much. Just how long can you keep going for? You know, the Green parties across the West, this is what I said in the Spectator column, the Green parties in the West, all in recent decades, had this incredibly free rein. They had incredibly radical policies about basically getting off all of our existing energy supplies to leap to an energy supply that didn't yet exist or didn't exist in sufficient enough quantities. They all got away with that. The supplicant media sucked it up. And now, as I say, we see the reality biting. And one of the most interesting ones is the Green Party in Germany. The Green Party in Germany doesn't have the luxury of being in opposition, as so many Green parties do. They're part of the coalition government. They recently had to agree, basically, to the continuation of fossil fuels in Germany. They're trying to hold out on the nuclear issue and still oppose the reopening of the German nuclear power plants, or at least not closing them, as Angela Merkel wanted to do. But, you know, as I say, maybe now that old friend of conservatives, reality, is going to teach everyone one of her great lessons. You know, we can dream of getting onto renewables, but not until they're there for us to use. And we have staked so much of our financial and energy futures on a dream which we were sold on extraordinarily false pretenses.
Yes, and from one crisis to another, and the illegal immigration crisis in the UK is not being addressed in any meaningful way, not when you've got 1,300 people crossing the channel illegally in a single day. That happened back in August 22. And the Border Force Union officials are saying that the total number of migrants crossing the channel in 2022 illegally is going to be around 60,000. Do the Tories not realise that this is actually a crisis?
It's unbelievable, Rita. 4 years ago, our then Home Secretary in the UK took a break from his Christmas holiday to go and stare at the water, which is what politicians do, of course, when they always want to show that they're on top of a crisis. And amazingly, that didn't solve the problem. But he said this is a national emergency. Well, what the numbers then that had come across that year, it's now 100 times that number that have come across this year so far. And it's very interesting, and particularly in the Australian context, because Australia is one of the countries that faced this 21st century problem, and it faced it down, and it addressed it and solved it. And of course, Australian governments got hell from the rest of the world, and all of these, halo polishing governments across the world who criticised Australians. But the Australian policy worked, and the British could have followed it. They could have followed it, and they haven't. They have just kept on hoping the problem will go away. But, Rita, we know that in the 21st century, this is going to be an ongoing issue for Australia, for Britain, for America, for all first world countries. There's never been a greater ease of travel, never been easier to communicate, never been easier to learn what you could get if you break the law and enter a country illegally. And I think that the fact that so many countries, and particularly Britain and America now, just basically are allowing the evaporation of their borders shows that they're also allowing the evaporation of their societies.
Absolutely. Now I've got to ask you about that demented hate speech from the leader of the free world, complete with that dystopian aesthetic. My goodness, you've written about the president condemning half the country as democracy-hating extremists and semi-fascists.
Yeah.
What did you make of that? The fallout from that has been fairly astonishing.
It has. I mean, you're right to mention the aesthetics. I mean, normally the aesthetics of a speech are not that important, but my word, they were here. It was a dark, incredibly disturbing setting and a dark and incredibly disturbing speech. Joe Biden came in and was elected president because he wasn't Donald Trump and because he promised to be the great uniter of America. And goodness knows America needs unity. And instead, just ahead of the midterms, we see that Joe Biden has given up on that aspiration. He's decided instead to be a great divider. He's decided that it plays better to his base to talk about, remember in 2016, Hillary Clinton described Republicans as basically a basket of deplorables. Joe Biden went much further than that. He said MAGA Republicans are semi-fascist. By the way, I don't know what semi-fascist means. It sounds like being a little bit pregnant. But semi-fascist was what he decided to label basically half the country. You can say, well, MAGA Republicans aren't the GOP, and there's something in that. But he knew what he was doing. He was saying that all the people who voted for Donald Trump, as I say, is up to half the country, are basically fascist. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean for a country? We know from the 20th century there's only one thing you can do with fascists. You can't live with them. You've got to fight them. You've got to kill them. And this is not the speech that Joe Biden was giving 2 years ago when he was running for office and promising unity or peace. It's deeply disturbing. It's an expression of the deepening discourse in America of division and a reminder that the people who present themselves as the great unifiers are very often the people most addicted to doing precisely the opposite.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's gone from being divisive in recent months to, dehumanising half the population. Yes. Because if you're describing them as fascists, like you said, you can justify whatever it is you want to do to them.
Absolutely.
Douglas Murray, always a pleasure to speak with you.
Great to speak to you. Thank you, Rita.